You're watching Reality Check. A day after those very worrying numbers about the crash in India's growth has come a pushback from the government where they're claiming that things are not as bad as they look. Kicking off the pushback was the chief economic advisor who told NDTV that India is going to recover. In other words, the growth which is looking down is going to go up, forming a V-shaped curve. Let's listen.
I am speaking based on the data that I'm seeing, and I actually listed those out. What is a V-shaped recovery? A V-shaped is basically when there is a fall, after which the indicators start going up. It's possible that the slope actually may not be exactly the same as that of the fall, because the fall is a drastic one. But clearly, the indicators that I gave you, clearly after the significant decline, there is recovery. So, I'm speaking based on data. I'm not here to give an opinion or even to respond to opinion.
Also, the other argument advanced by those by the likes of S. Gurumurthy, who's of course the well-known RSS ideologue and is also a director on the Reserve Bank of India, is that when it comes to the fall in growth, India is actually not so bad. So he cited data saying that the world drop or data cut of GDP, the US is down 33%, UK 21%, Singapore almost 43%, Japan 28%, Canada 38.7%, which looks, if you compare it in that sense, better than India's 24%. But it's entirely unclear what the source of Mr. Gurumurthy's data is and whether he's using the correct quarter-to-quarter comparison that everyone else has done. Because this is what the actual numbers are. We can put them on the screen. That we took this data from the OECD website, where India is actually quarter-to-quarter the worst performer of major economies, down 24%, which is much worse than Spain at 22, UK at 21, Mexico at 19, France at 19, etc., etc. So the US is at 9.1%, while Mr. Gurumurthy has a figure of 33%. Okay, I spoke earlier to P. Chidambaram, former finance minister, and I asked him about this, about whether the opposition is being unduly harsh on the government for what is essentially what the finance minister called an act of God. On this entire GDP numbers, you called it an economic tragedy foretold by the Modi government. The finance ministry and the government is saying that this is an act of God. All countries are affected and are in deep distress because of the pandemic.
Of course, all countries are affected. The question is, which countries have been able to cushion the decline? Which countries have been able to contain the decline to an acceptable, moderate level? The worst, of course, is the United States. And the second worst, or the third worst, is India. There are other countries which have been able to cushion the decline by taking preventive measures, proactive measures, and welfare measures. Our government did nothing. They did not take the fiscal measures. They did not take adequate welfare measures, as a result of which the decline is so precipitous and the suffering is so huge.
Do they argument that where do we have the funds to actually provide that cushion? You would say what?
Well, many of us have written, spoken, given interviews about where the funds are. You have to borrow and spend. If you think the borrowing is reaching a point where it is hurting some other financial parameters, then you monetize part of the deficit. Now, yesterday I read that the international agencies, IMF, World Bank, ADB, are willing to lend up to 6.5 billion US dollars, which is 3 times more than what the FM had budgeted in her budget. Now, if she had budgeted about $2 billion and you're now getting or likely to get $6.5 billion, why can't you use the difference to handle the pandemic? This aid is only for pandemic-related activities.
Okay. So you're saying that don't worry, because there's this constant sort of bogey that's raised of rating agencies and so on, that if you You borrow too deeply or you break the fiscal deficit, you will get rated as junk and so on. Is that at all a legitimate concern at this stage?
These are alarmist prophecies. I want to know which countries' bonds have been rated junk by the rating agencies. Point out one G20 country whose bond has been rated as junk. The rating agencies will say things from time to time, but they will change their views from time to time. I can give you any number of examples where the rating agencies have changed their view. We have to do what is good for us. And the rating agencies' rating is only relevant if you are floating bonds in the overseas market. India is not issuing bonds on the overseas market. We are issuing bonds on the domestic market. There is enough money in the domestic market to borrow.
Okay.
If the borrowing limit is breached so heavily that the RBI and the government feel that we should not borrow anymore, but monetize part of the deficit and keep it within whatever limits are tolerable.
Okay. The chief economic advisor says that it's looking bad, but the worst is behind us. We're heading for a V-shaped recovery. Do you see any evidence of that?
I don't know of anyone who takes the chief economic advisor seriously. I think you should ask the chief economic advisor when was it the last time he had a one-on-one conversation with the prime minister. He's been saying this for many months. He's been predicting a V-shaped recovery since last year. And then he also saw green shoots, moments the finance minister saw green shoots. Where are the green shoots? Will the CEA please answer, where are the green shoots?
He's been citing data from railway freight and so on to suggest that those numbers are indicative of some kind of turnaround. Core sector data is also showing that, there's been some kind of improvement.
Every data point that he relies upon has been refuted by the RBI's annual report. If I remember right, the railway freight earning has fallen by 90% or so. Read the RBI's report. Is there anything more credible and authentic in this country than the RBI's report? It's among the institutions, it is the most credible one. The CSO numbers confirm what the RBI says. Why should I take the CEA seriously?
So, Mr. Chidambaram, what you're saying is that in this scenario, the government should borrow heavily if that's what is required, or they should monetize debt, which in ordinary parlance is called printing cash. Am I correct?
There's nothing wrong with that. Why are sovereigns given the power to print currency? No other authority in a country has that power. Only the sovereign has. The states don't have in India. Only the federal government, the union government has. That's an extraordinary power which is available to all sovereign governments. You have to use that power sometime or other. If you don't use it today, when the pandemic is spreading at such a rapid pace, I think we are crossing 75,000 new infections per day. I had predicted we will cross 35 lakhs by the end of August. We did it with 1 day to spare. And I'm predicting now we will cross 50 lakhs, maybe touch 55 lakhs by the end of September. We will overtake Brazil in a couple of weeks. And we may be within touching distance of the United States. This is the most serious crisis that has affected India. That's the language of the RBI report. According to the RBI, it's worse than the Great Depression of the 1930s.
Right.
It is worse than the global financial crisis of 2008. We have never encountered such a phenomenon. This is the time to borrow, spend, boost demand, put money in the hands of very poor people so that they can consume at least the bare essentials, and if necessary, as a last resort, monetize part of the deficit, which is, in common parlance, print money to cover part of the deficit.
Mr. Chidambaram, the government would argue that they actually already have announced a 20 lakh crore package. The the famous Atmanirbhar package. To that you would say what?
That was a joke. That package has been taken apart bit by bit, and any number of economists, leave me out, any number of economists have rated it as between 1% to 2% of a fiscal stimulus. I think Praveen Chakravarti and I calculated the fiscal stimulus part at about 1.6 or 1.7%.
Yes.
The world average is 12.1. The advanced economies are doing 19% of GDP.
Spending.
And here we are boasting doing a fiscal stimulus of 1 to 2% and saying that's enough. Is it enough? Please remember, the advanced economies are doing 19% of GDP when per capita income is very high and their poverty levels are very low. In a country where the poverty levels are very high, close to 35, 40%, and the per capita income is low, we should actually spend more, put more money in the hands of the poor people. All that we say is put money in the hands of the bottom 50% of the population.
Last word from you. If you had just a one line of simple advice to give Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, as former Finance Minister to Finance Minister, what would that be?
Well, don't blame God. In fact, you should thank God. The gods have blessed the farmers of this country who have turned out an increase in production of about 3.4%. That's the only silver lining. Don't blame God.
Okay.
These are man-made disasters. Yes, the pandemic is a natural disaster. It's a pandemic. But you're compounding that natural disaster by man-made disasters by gross mismanagement.
All
We
right.
will learn lessons from other countries and deal with the problem to the best of our ability. And the answer is to borrow, spend, and transfer money to the poor people.
Okay. Mr. Chidambaram, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
We're joined by Ratin Roy, who is formerly part of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, also heading the policy think tank, the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, and is now on his way to head the ODI, the Overseas Development Institute, as Managing Director. Thanks very much indeed, Ratin Roy, for joining us. Now, Ratin Roy, the point is that since those numbers have come, there has been a kind of pushback by the government. There have been claims that it's not really that bad. We've just had on the Chief Economic Advisor on this very show just a short while ago, and he was saying that there is a V-shaped curve, that basically it's a V, we've hit the rock bottom, and now we're starting to see an uptick. Are you seeing any of that?
I don't know about the alphabets describing economics, but let me try and explain to your listeners what has happened. Our economy normally grows because we are a developing country. For the first time in 31 years, our economy is not growing. It is doing the opposite of growing, which is it is shrinking. This shrinking is substantial in the first quarter. We have shrunk by as much as 23% of GDP, which means that we have to recover 23% of GDP, that is a quarter of the economy, in the next 3 quarters. If that is a V-shaped recovery, then it would mean that we would start growing positively in every single quarter from now. And if that is the Chief Economic Advisor's contention, then I'd be very interested in knowing where he got that sort of comfort. I simply do not think that our shrinking of the economy is going to stop after this first quarter.
You think it's
The
getting...
service sector
Yes, go ahead.
is still shrinking. Manufacturing is picking up, but very slowly. The boost we got from agriculture in the first quarter is over. The next boost will come with the Kharif crop, and that will be the third and fourth quarters. So I'm skeptical about a so-called V-shaped recovery. That's one.
Okay.
Second, if we must look at alphabets, the V could be a U, which is we could have gone to the bottom and we can stay there for a while before we pick up. And we simply don't know which of these alphabets will apply.
Okay.
What we do know is the economy has shrunk substantially in the first quarter, and this comes on the back of a declining growth story last year. The economy is in serious trouble.
Okay. The other sort of defense of what is going on is coming again, not just necessarily from the government, but allies of the government like S. Gurumurthy, who, as we know, has been a long-time ideologue of the sort of the Sangh Parivar and is also on the RBI board. Now, he says he's citing data to show that India's crash is actually not as bad as the rest of the world. He's saying the world data of cut in GDP, US minus 33%, UK minus 21%, Singapore minus 43%, Japan minus 28%, Canada minus 38.7%. Now, there's a little bit of confusion on this, Ratan, because I've seen a very, variations of this floating around on WhatsApp and social media. It's not clear to me whether this is a like-for-like comparison, because what we are looking at is really what has happened to India with this quarter compared to the previous similar quarter last year, and the same for all other countries. This doesn't seem to quite match that.
Srinivasan, what is the source of this data?
That's not made clear.
Well, then how can I comment on a data whose source is not clear? What I do know from the sources I have,
yes,
which include the OECD, is that the latest available figures show that the deceleration we have seen in the growth rate in India is probably comparable to the worst performing rich economy, which is the UK. Now, remember, these are very tentative numbers.
Yes.
So 1 or 2 percentage point doesn't mean we are better or worse if we are trying to play a cricket match.
That's what
the UK has also declined by more than 20%, so have we. That data does not show other economies declining by the same amount. So we can certainly say that the economic hit that India has taken has been as bad, if not worse, as the worst performing rich countries.
I was about to say the same thing, because the chart that we had, and I'll try and see if we can put that up, this is comparing India to the rest of the world's growth, is actually showing India as the worst, the same source, OECD. So India is at 24.9%, Spain is at 22%, UK is again 21.7%, then Mexico, then France, Italy, Germany, US at 9%, and China is the only one at plus 3.2%. So that doesn't at all square off with Mr. Gurumurthy's figures. Last point question to you: if this does not happen, if there is no spending or there is no plan to spend, what are we looking at?
We are looking at a slow and painful, possibly U-shaped, possibly V-shaped. If there's a second wave, a W-shaped, you can pick one of those alphabets, right? After any alphabet beyond T, U, V, W, Y, any alphabet beyond T.
You're talking of growth, or you're talking of the virus? You're talking of growth now, the growth
I'm
curve.
talking about growth.
Okay.
I'm only talking about growth.
Okay.
I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm only talking about growth.
Okay.
But the point is that, how deep that V will be. It's not like writing a V in an exercise book. I could write a V on a huge wall, or I could write a V on a page. How deep will that V be? It will be deeper the longer you postpone having a spending battle plan. And therefore, our task is to have that spending battle plan in, so that we can restore the economy
Right.
by at least 2022 to where we were in 2020. That will not solve all our problems, because for the last 3 years, since 2016, 4 years, the Indian economy has already been declining in terms of growth.
Yes.
But just to get back to zero will take at least 2 years, and it will take longer. The longer we postpone, and then the deeper will become, and more volatile if it becomes a W, will become the letters of the alphabet.
Okay. All right. Ratan Roy, great talking to you. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, Srinivas.
Okay, on the show we have, last but not least, S.C. Garg, who's been former Finance Secretary, Government of India. Thank you very much indeed, Garg Sahab, for being with us and patiently listening to the others. Now, I leave it to you to try and see if at all you can defend the government against some fairly strong critiques that you've just heard from Chidambaram and Ratan Roy. Do you see at all any merit in the argument that's being made that the worst is behind us, or is that premature?
See, that is if you look at from the quarterly perspective, the V-shaped kind of argument which the chief economic advisor made.
Yes.
From the quarterly perspective, I agree, and that's my assessment, that worst was behind us in the first quarter.
Okay.
The 24-25% kind of contraction which we saw in the first quarter,
Yes.
I don't think and I don't hope we will have this kind of contraction in any of the quarters to come in the current year and subsequently. And therefore, if you are looking for a bottom point from the quarterly perspective, we have seen perhaps the worst behind us. But if you look at from the yearly perspective,
Yes.
the year 2021 still has 3 quarters to go.
Right.
And I estimate that the year 2021 probably will have the contraction of about 10%.
So if
annual
the
contraction of about 10%.
in simple terms, if growth is going to shrink or contract or whatever 10%, by what is the growth figure going to be finally? Because we were looking at the beginning of the year, it was supposed to be around 8% this year. What is it actually going to end up closer to?
You're saying Q2 or for the year 2020?
The whole year. The whole year.
Whole year minus 20%, minus 10%.
Minus 10%.
Yes.
GDP.
That's correct.
Good God. Isn't that catastrophic?
See, you have 25% contraction in one quarter. So on annual terms, this is about 6.25%. The second quarter, 2 months ago, we have still seen enormous amount of contraction on the investment side and on the discretionary consumption side. So I expect even the quarter 2 to be minus 12 to 15%.
So overall, it's not looking very good.
Exactly.
Very, very, very short on time. Just if you were to summarize literally in 2 lines, what's the way out?
The way out is that we have to spend more on capital expenditure as well as to give demand boost for the non-discretionary consumption of the poor.
Okay.
Those are the 2 areas where you have to spend more. And at this moment, like in times of war and all, only one game in the town is the government. And the government can only spend on these to keep the economy going forward.
Spender of last resort, as they say.
That's correct.
That's really where we are right now. Mr. Garg, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I'm sorry we didn't have more time, but we'll have you back on soon. Thanks very much indeed. That's all the time we have on Reality Check. Thanks so much for watching. Good night.